And it's almost like we're done putting up with the way that our parents are. We need to be there to make sure that they're happy constantly. There was a lot of pressure on us for that.
Especially queer community coming from a South Asian culture, such a weight on their shoulders. Have you had to deal with many clients from the queer community?
Western therapy sort of tells us to cut them off, set those limits, set a boundary, bugger off and live our own lives. Roles in a world that has always told them that they need to be the protector, the provider, that masculine presence for their family. What was your parents like growing up? Did they always put their own needs on the back burner and prioritize children? Did you watch your mother prioritize her husband and her children over herself? Keep trying, doing this degree, doing that degree, trying to earn more money. And this is, I think, something that pops up a lot for our South Asians, especially in my client sessions, is they're all really, really high achievers, but they're all really exhausted and burnt out.
Like, oh my God, Sharmaji's daughter, she's doing so well. She's earning this much.
It was on that trip to India where she saw her mother being judged and criticized the same way that she is by her mother. It comes back to that core ancestral wounding that occurred when there was migration, when there was colonisation, with the partition. And it was all those memories from school where I was maybe sometimes the only, coloured child or Indian child in these predominantly white spaces. New Zealand has one of the highest teen suicide rates and mental health. It's a huge crisis in New Zealand. And I knew that was a space that I wanted to work in. And I just felt this sense of responsibility to create more awareness for the community and for people out there as well.
Welcome to the next episode of the S&S Diaries, a modern South Asian podcast where we talk business, life, and everything in between. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting a very special guest, someone who I think is one of a kind, probably really hard to come by, especially in our culture. I'd like to welcome Saijel Dheda, a South Asian therapist who specializes in intergenerational trauma. Saijel, welcome to the S&S Diaries. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Shar. It's so great to be here, finally, us having this talk.
That's right. So, Saijel, tell us a little bit about your journey and basically what's brought you or what drew you to wanting to become a therapist?
So growing up, I had a mum, a dad, and 2 siblings, and very much growing up around the Indian culture, immersed in it. Both my grandfathers migrated to New Zealand when they were just children themselves. So my family's been in New Zealand for a very long time.
Wow.
Both of them went back to India to marry and brought wives from India. So both my parents were born in New Zealand, and so was myself. As I got older, this is when I sort of really began connecting in with my culture. I think between sort of toddler years to about adolescence, you're kind of just going through life, being a kid, nothing really phases you, But it wasn't until I got a little bit older and I started becoming a woman myself, entering into romantic relationships, trying to navigate the outside world, where I guess my culture hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yes.
And it was all those memories from school where I was maybe sometimes the only, coloured child or Indian child in these predominantly white spaces. And at the time when I was a kid, didn't think anything of it. But as I reflected back now as an adult, thinking about, wow, there was a lot of opportunities for me to feel rejected, feel isolated. And that's when I began really thinking about the impact that my grandparents and the way that they were raised and the way that they raised my parents has trickled down to create the way that I now view the world. And it was entering, I guess, into romantic relationships. I think particularly in that South Asian culture, the gender roles is something that's really huge, right?
Absolutely.
And just as a woman feeling that pressure, as a partner, suddenly thinking, okay, I need to prioritize somebody else's needs over my own. And I think throughout those relationships, I began to lose myself. And that's where I really began to question things. I was always interested. I remember in high school, I said I really wanted to help people. I really wanted to work in mental health. Growing up in New Zealand, New Zealand has one of the highest teen suicide rates and mental health. It's a huge crisis in New Zealand. And I knew that was a space that I wanted to work in. So going off to university, I started studying psychology, but then life got in the way. Experienced a lot of, roadblocks, turns, kind of led me on a different path. And it wasn't until I was 25 that I actually came back to myself. And that's when I finally embarked on the journey into therapy. So then it became a combination of that deep passion that I had from when I was young to now my life experience. And I think reflecting back now from when I turned 18 to 25, that was a real pivotal life experience, deep dive for me to become and to learn who I am, to now live the life and help people in the way that I do.
What an amazing journey. Saijel, you made a few good points in what you said. So tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned you have a couple of generations in your family in New Zealand. Do you find now when you work with your clients that there is a difference as to your exposure versus theirs when they've come to the country now?
Honestly, I work with a lot of clients who, are living in Australia or are living in New Zealand, and they may have migrated when they were children or their parents migrated over. Yeah. And the experience and the things that we do is exactly the same. They don't feel a difference. I don't feel a difference, because a lot of it, for me, the way that I work in that intergenerational space, it comes back to that core ancestral wounding that occurred when there was migration, when there was colonisation, with the partition. All those types of experiences, I know you came at a different time, you've migrated. We've all migrated at different points in our life and in different time periods. But with the lens that I take, the intergenerational aspect is the things that are still showing up in our life today. And that looks the same sometimes for you and me. Not that our traumatic experiences are the same.
Yes.
But their histories collect back together to our collective culture.
Yes.
And so that's where I can bring through that understanding as well.
100%. You mentioned, of course, throughout your journey, you've had a few roadblocks. Coming from a South Asian family myself, I can sort of, say this is a common theme across parents. Growing up, they always ask you, or they expect you almost, that they want you to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. Anything outside of this is taboo, and they tell you, no, what are you even thinking? That's not an option. How did that go down with your family when you told them this is the path you wanted to take?
I think something that is really ingrained in the culture is fear. There's a lot of fear around a lot of things. And I think when I think about that from that intergenerational perspective, there have been a lot of things I think that have challenged our culture, that have really kind of shocked our ancestors and put us in a position where we have felt unsafe at times. And I think when I did decide to pursue mental health, I think the stance that my father took was very fear-based around, you're going to end up in these really compromising positions with some people that are not going to treat you very well.
Yes.
And for me, I never even sort of thought about it like that. And of course I was like, okay, yes, you're going to find the one negative thing about possibly working in mental health, that maybe you come across one person that may be unsafe in your entire life. I personally never have, but it was met with a lot of fear of what that looked like for my life. But also I think one thing in terms of the gender and the identity is, as a girl, compared to my brother, I've always felt like I've never been seen that I'm quite as capable as he was. So it's like, well, no, but you're a girl. I don't think that you are going to be able to do that. And very much seen that, like, okay, well, you're a girl. What if you meet with these clients and you can't protect yourself,
Yes.
That type of thinking around, because it's fear dressed up as control, right? Ultimately, my parents trying to protect me, but also trying to control the direction of where I'm taking my life.
Yes, 100%.
But then having that lens, okay, yeah, I can understand where the fear-based thinking is coming from, that you're worried about my safety and my security at times, but also that worry around, she's my daughter. Women don't always have that opportunity to protect themselves, and seen as women who are not able to show up in these same spaces that men do with the same, strength, resilience. We're not perceived in that way, are we?
Not at all, which is very unfair. You rightfully said the girls in the family are brought up very differently to boys in our culture. Do you see this shifting at all, or what's your experience been when you work with clients like this, where over the years they've had this experience in their family and the constant rejection for many ideas and things, and how do you think that affects them in the long term?
I think there's definitely a shift now. I think the generation of women that are coming through now are finding it, while it's still very difficult, and I work with a lot of clients who are trying to take that stand, especially a lot of women, and there's a lot of pressure put on them to be that moral compass for the family. You know, you are a representation of our parenting. And when we stand up against that and we begin to question our parents, we're perceived as we're rebelling and we're going against our religion and our culture. And that's very, very scary, you know, because I think one of the things that's very deeply embedded in our culture is that enmeshment, which is where we struggle to be able to set boundaries, where the families are so closely connected that our decisions, our voice is exactly the same as our families. We're all seen as a collective and as one, right? So when we decide to think outside of that, we are representing our family and saying we're stepping outside of that. And that's really scary. But there's a lot more women that are observing that there is a need for us to stand up, to find our voice. And it's not about rejection, and it's not about pushing away the culture. It's about allowing two things to coexist at the same time. But it's also about bringing our parents with us, because we also know that a lot of the time it can be met with being completely rejected from the family as well. Because we don't want to associate with somebody that is considered rebellious or going against the culture. But for a lot of these women, that's not what it is. A lot of it's about finding themselves. A lot of it's about them setting boundaries and limits and making choices for the things that they want to do.
And Saijel, for someone who's going through this actively right now, what would be an advice you'd give them as this should be your first action?
I would say there is a lot of fear, and the fear will never disappear. This is a lifelong journey. And I think for a lot of the women, when they're coming in, they're like, I need it to happen. There's this rush or this urgency. And I get it. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. The faster I can do it, the faster I can move on. But it's a journey. And I think the one thing that I'm trying to teach a lot of these women is learning to be able to love and respect yourself. And throughout the culture, a lot of that hasn't been, I guess, demonstrated to us, right? That self-love as a woman. So it's about learning to be kind to yourself with also setting those limits. And when you're not able to set those limits as well, not feeling that frustration and that overwhelm towards yourself. It's taking it day by day and acknowledging everybody's on their own journey. And sometimes it looks small. Sometimes it's, you see a call from your mother coming up and it's like checking in with yourself. Do I have the capacity to hold space for her worries right now?
Yes.
I will call you back, but I'm not going to pick up the phone right now.
And that's where the boundaries come into play very much so, isn't it? Because I think the way we're brought up, we internalize so much of the guilt to say, if I don't answer this, what will my parents perceive me as? A bad daughter. I've got to give them my time, even though you don't have that in your cup. Even I can resonate to this 100%, so that hits close to home. Talking about just upbringing and dialogues, especially since we're speaking about women right now. Tell me, Saijel, most of us grow up hearing from basically aunties at social gatherings, or even just elders in social gatherings where they either body shame you, either ways, even if you're skinny or you're on the chubbier side, they'll tell you, if you're skinny, they'll tell your parents, what are you doing? Are you not feeding your daughter? Do you guys not make enough money? Like, feed your daughter because she looks anorexic or malnourished. Vice versa, you think of the other side, and if they're putting on weight, they'll be like, beta, if you keep doing this and eating all these sweets, no one's going to marry you when you grow up. You know, how do you think we can unlearn these things? Because listening to this and growing up, the trauma really gets embedded in people, and they carry this weight when they move away from home, perhaps. And when people start, basically working on themselves and learning to self-love, how would they go on that journey?
It's one that really hits home, because I think it's something that we've all experienced at some point in our lives. And I think this is the hard thing about it, is that it's not a one-off event. It's a ongoing, and it's not even silent. It's that vocalization, you're not good enough. And that belief system becomes embedded, that my self-worth is attached to how acceptable I am to society and to my family, right? And so we begin to internalize this belief system about ourselves as a woman, that I'm not good enough. My self-worth is connected to how society perceives me. You begin to become very anxious and feel uncomfortable in social spaces. This is a topic that I have explored a lot. And what I explored when I went through the intergenerational aspects of it, and it actually really resonated with me, and it'll be interesting to hear if it resonates with you. So growing up, when we're thinking about our ancestors, right, the experience that they had in India, that marriage is something that is so prioritized. It's really put out there, and it's almost this opportunity for a family to connect with another family, right? So it's something that's huge in our culture. And this is where the pressure of the way that you look, the color of your skin, your body weight becomes almost completely linked to the family's reputation. That if my daughter is seen as somebody that's worthy of marrying, and she's got 6 or 7 prospects lined up around the corner, my social status goes from here to here.
Absolutely.
Right? So you think about, this is what our grandmothers experienced, right?
That's right.
That there was this pressure to look beautiful, to look a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. And that came from family members constantly picking apart things that didn't look perfect because of their fear that if we have a daughter that is not married, what does that speak about our family? And what does that do to our family's reputation, right? Mm. So you can see how this narrative of the way that women are perceived in these social situations has trickled down, and it's still showing up in our lives today, right? Uh-huh. Like, we don't live in an environment where we're waiting for marriage prospects around the corner, but intergenerationally, the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents still carry this worry. I need to have a daughter that is looking perfect, that is having more marriage prospects than the other girl down the road, right? So this is where now we're subject to this criticism, this ridicule, this over-criticism. So it's another dressed up fear, right? Coming across as shaming. And like you said, ultimately it creates a lot of deep wounds for us as women.
Absolutely.
And often we see that showing up in, body dysphoria, eating disorders, minimizing the things that we're eating, feeling uncomfortable in these social spaces. I mean, like a lot of the things I mentioned before. And understanding it from that intergenerational context actually loosens that weight a little bit. And that's where I've had clients come to therapy. They've been dealing with, the self-esteem and the body issues from such a long time, and they've had that individual approach, right, with a Western therapist, and they've found they've been circling that issue. But I find that when I've asked the client to connect with their mother, to talk with their mother, to understand their experience as well. And it doesn't have to be like, a deep and meaningful conversation. It's just actually observing your mother showing up. Does she criticize herself? Does she watch what she eats? And what we want to do is we want to take ourselves from being in the experience to become observing the experience. Because what we want to do is we want to bring ourselves into that space of awareness where we see ourselves fixing ourselves, checking our bellies, watching what we eat. So it's from being in the experience to observing the experience. And I've urged a lot of my clients to begin observing their mothers in that space as well, and bringing these conversations into the home to break those silences, not to judge or to criticize, but to ask, why do you worry so much? You shouldn't have to worry about the things that you're eating or the weight on the scale, We have to be able to accept ourselves.
Absolutely. Could you share with us perhaps a time someone's implemented this and had a breakthrough in your session? What did that look like?
It was a really beautiful experience. I had a client who came to therapy that been struggling with eating her entire life. And I began just by asking her about her story, and we had gone through therapy, and it was really great because we had made a lot of progress. She had stopped worrying about going to the gym. She'd stopped monitoring what she'd eaten. And then she had this trip to India coming up. And she was really fearful about going and losing all her progress, right? The sweets, the food, not being able to access the gym. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? This is actually an opportunity to connect with your roots, to actually observe this stuff happening in real time. And it was on that trip to India where she saw her mother being judged and criticized the same way that she is by her mother's aunties and uncles and grandmothers. And she was like, in that moment, the amount of empathy and understanding I had just by going to that India trip to be the observer rather than being immersed in that experience, she went in there to be the observer of her experience and to see it happening. And because she wasn't in there unconsciously going through the trip, she was actually able to bring forth this newfound empathy and understanding for her mum. And it was really, really beautiful to hear her come back after that trip. And she was like, you have no idea how much my life has changed just by seeing the experiences. Because, trickling down, she's like, I can finally see where it comes from. And it doesn't belong with me. It's not my pain. It comes from my grandmothers and the things that they went through because of the pressures of marriage, gender roles, and all those. And so that was a really, really beautiful, circle. And I was like, you've done it. You've come full circle. Once we come to that place of empathy and understanding, it's not that the healing ends, it's layered, yes. But at its core, you've been able to meet what needed to be healed. Indeed. And it was a really beautiful.
Absolutely. That's just fantastic. Tell me, Saijel, was she able to have any more conversations with her mother about that? Mm-hmm. And did that help her mum at all?
Yeah, so she is now actually able to have these open conversations and question with her mum, I think having that shared experience was something that she was able to now have these open, honest conversations with her mum around the way that she looks, the way that we monitor food, the way that we make these comments as well. Because her mum was also immersed in it, right?
Yes.
But then I said, this is your opportunity to bring it into your mum's awareness, the way that these cycles are continuing, and you have an opportunity here. Because she's an older sister out of all her cousins and stuff. And she said, now I feel like there's this sense of responsibility to break these cycles and to change the narrative and to begin to look at ourselves more positively. And I said, yeah, it's hard because I've noticed a lot in the Indian culture. There's so much competition between women.
100%.
A lot of competition. And going back to that story, I sort of said, you can see where it comes from, that our fathers and our uncles, it was kind of the men that was sort of creating this disconnect, right? Where it's like, we need to have the most desirable. So everybody was trying to do the same. And what we ended up doing is we created this disconnect between us as women, where we began seeing each other as competition rather than our allies.
100%. I think ever since we're young, we are always compared with our auntie's kids, compared with our neighbors' kids. You constantly grow up listening to dialogues like, oh my God, Sharmaji's daughter, she's doing so well. She's earning this much. Whereas what are you doing? You're just at home. You've not even thought about your future, haven't enrolled yourself into a course. What is this? Like, you're making our family's name go down to shame. Listening to this, how do you think people or the younger generation can get out of this rut, basically, and actually pursue things that they're passionate about?
It's a tricky one because I think, again, it's one of those things that has repeatedly been done from the moment they were born. Yeah, through the generations, but also just in your home itself is right. That constant comparison. And again, when we think about it on that intergenerational lens, it comes from that space of survival, where getting a job, going off to university and acquiring things meant that our social standing was increased. Our parenting as well, because we're a reflection of our parents' parenting. It's back to that enmeshment within the culture. And that's why there's a lot of pressure placed on us, because it's control dressed up as comparison, right? Trying to steer you in the direction that they want you to do. So it's a way of pushing you towards what they want you to achieve. And what I think this is the thing that a lot of the parents don't realize is it's their way of trying to encourage you, because they want you to reach your full potential and they want you to achieve everything they know you can. But unfortunately, it has that opposite effect, right?
That's right.
Where we have a lot of young people now who are those overachievers, but there's so much chronic fatigue and burnout because they're constantly feeling like they're not good enough and they need to do more. And where does that end? They keep trying, doing this degree, doing that degree, trying to earn more money. And this is, I think, something that pops up a lot for our South Asians, especially in my client sessions, is they're all really, really high achievers, but they're all really exhausted and burnt out.
Every single one of them, us included, I'd like to say, until we...
Yeah, right.
If I think about it myself, I'm the same. I just want to keep working to reach the results till I burn myself to the ground. Otherwise, I'm like, oh no, I've got a little bit more to give. Let me do it. Yes, no, 100% agree with you on that. You mentioned the control aspect and how your parents, even unconsciously, get you to that path. Some, though, are pretty blatant. If they lose that aspect of control, they are very quick to exchange a dialogue with you by saying, oh, beta, I'm only doing this or saying this for your own good. And they actually really don't understand within themselves that there's probably a different pathway which might have, a different result for the younger generation, purely because, of course, they've not had the exposure, many other reasons, right?
Yeah.
What is your advice for the younger generation who want to challenge this?
This is a good question, because I think a lot of us do struggle in that space, particularly, and this is something that I think Western therapy sort of tells us to cut them off, set those limits, set a boundary, bugger off and live our own lives, right? But that is not something that is easy for us from these collective cultures, right? Our family is everything, and we need to learn to allow both parts to coexist. But I think something that's really important in these spaces when we are wanting to set boundaries is firstly and foremostly to acknowledge the intentions of our parents before we set that boundary or explain what we want. Because a lot of the time when we're having these conversations, we get our back up straight away and we're sort of pushing back. No, I don't want to do that. Yeah. Yes. But what our parents are looking for in that moment is that validation where it's, Mum, I know the sacrifices that you've made. I know how hard it's been for you and Mum, you and Dad. I know how much you want what's best for me. So I encourage, if you're wanting to have these conversations, that the first place to start is to be able to acknowledge, because that's what a lot of these parents are looking for as well. There's a lot of, the sacrifices that they made when they migrated, had no money, had to find jobs. There's a lot of, I guess, traumatic experiences that they've been through, which is where that pressure comes from as well, where they're like, everything that we've sacrificed has to amount to something. Our child has to be successful, which is where that pressure comes from. But what they're actually looking for is an acknowledgement that their sacrifices meant something. And if you can deliver that in that moment when you are wanting to assert yourself or, give direction for a different path, but acknowledging what they're done for you and the sacrifices is a really great place to start with having those conversations.
That's a very interesting take. So many people fail to understand. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that when people become parents, that's a new experience for them and first time in their lives as well. And they're trying to do the best they can. And I feel like if we keep that in mind, when we have these difficult conversations, the acknowledgement comes automatically as well. Indeed. So, Saijel, we've used the term intergenerational trauma a few times now. For our listeners, could you explain a little bit more in depth as to what that means and how that shows up in people's lives?
So when I started writing my thesis, one of the things that I really wanted to sort of explore is, I think, intergenerational trauma as like an umbrella term is something that obviously has been explored a lot, with Holocaust survivors and Indigenous populations. But the stance that I wanted to take is intergenerational trauma is actually something that we all experience. We all carry the experiences, the traumas, and even DNA. So intergenerational trauma is the movement of experiences from one generation to the next, and the patterns showing up in your current life, even if you haven't been subject or exposed to the original trauma. So there's what we call epigenetics, which has proven to show that the expression of genes actually changes with the exposure of a trauma. So, our grandparents, with colonisation, partition, all these types of things, there was experiences that traumatized them. It changed the way that their DNA expressed itself. And so it gets passed down that way. The other way that intergenerational trauma gets passed down is a thing called the transgenerational atmosphere, which is through like parenting, And I always say this to my parents when I'm working in therapy with them. It's not about actually what we say to our children. It's the way that we're unconsciously showing up that we're creating that transgenerational atmosphere with how things get passed down. And I know we talked a little bit around like the woman, and it would be like an example, like, you're telling your daughter she's beautiful, she's perfect just the way she is, but you yourself are constantly looking in the mirror, telling yourself you need to lose weight, And I think one that shows up a lot in our culture is that self-sacrificing aspect. I have so many, and this is like the common term now, clients turn up saying they're people pleasers. And I'm like, tell me, what was your parents like growing up? Did they always put their own needs on the back burner and prioritize children? Did you watch your mother prioritize her husband and her children over herself? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you're doing exactly the same thing. Even though your mother never told you explicitly to prioritize other people's needs, you saw her do that every day. And so now this is how you're showing up in your life, not being able to appreciate and prioritize yourself. And that's whether that's emotionally, financially, practically, you're putting your own needs second. So we've got the epigenetics, we've got the transgenerational atmosphere, how it's transferred. And then also with with pregnancy, the experiences that the mother has throughout her pregnancy as well, whether it's been a stressful pregnancy, a peaceful pregnancy, has there been support around her as well? All of that changes the experience and the hormones, the stress hormones that the baby is submerged in. So all of the experiences that your mother had when she was pregnant also contribute to the way that you now experience the world. Through fear, through anxiety, through depression, those types of things.
That's really interesting. I don't think many people really think of things this way, or even think of how they react to certain situations. So it really gives us a good oversight. We've spoken a bit about basically all the traumatic experiences that our ancestors have undergone. One of the coping mechanisms for that is, in many families, they've learned to say, oh, we don't talk about that. Oh, no. That's not worth talking about. Let's just push that under the rug. How do you deal with clients who have grown up in an environment like that, where they've just been taught to bottle up things and just not talk about certain topics?
Yeah, I think this is something that is a really scary part of what we're trying to do now, right? Because a lot of it, like we've said, is about that conversation. It's about coming together. And because a lot of the silencing and the we don't talk about it, it was a mechanism that was so necessary for our ancestors, right? It was, we can't look back, because if we look back, we're not going to get through what's coming next, right? They lived day by day. It was a lot of stress and it was a lot of overwhelm. So this we don't talk about it was something that actually kept them safe. And I think the thing about therapy is we have to acknowledge, when we're thinking about things from an intergenerational lens, we're talking generations of people, not just the person sitting in the therapy room with me trying to open up. They've come from a long line of women or men that weren't allowed to talk about it as well.
That's right.
Right? So they've also inherited this inability to feel safe enough to express what's on their mind. So one thing that is really important is to have a trauma-informed approach, and it's necessary to build that rapport to create safety. Because it's not that emotions weren't present, it's that they weren't allowed, right? We all have emotions, we all feel them. And this is something that is, we say, it doesn't exist, or mental health's not a thing. It does exist, it is a thing. We're human, we feel emotions. It's that the permission was never there, And so for me in the therapeutic space, it's about allowing that permission for these feelings to exist without there being consequences, without there being shame, without there being judgment. And that comes from creating that safety to begin with and working very gently with the client to bring those walls down, and acknowledge why they're there. What are you trying to protect yourself from? What are you afraid of as well? So before we even can get to the work, there's a lot of work outside of that in the intergenerational space to work through those blocks or those, protective mechanisms that are showing up, because their ancestors are also behind them saying, we're not going to let this in. We can't let this guard down. We need to protect ourselves.
Yes. There is definitely a lot of work going around the trauma-informed topic at the moment. I can certainly say, coming from a healthcare background as well, really specialising in aged care myself, there is a lot of focus on what we call trauma-informed care. So it's really moving and shifting many people's thinking. So I really hope that goes far, because it is something that's an amazing cause, really. We've spoken about men, not really a lot. We will touch that topic in a bit, but also women and now, intergenerational trauma. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the queer community, especially queer community coming from a South Asian culture. I feel personally they're carrying such a weight on their shoulders. Have you had to deal with many clients from the queer community? How are they showing up in your sessions at the moment? Do you feel things are shifting in that regard?
Yes, I have. And I think the things that are important to acknowledge with our queer community is, one of the big things is the fatigue from the fragmentation of identity. And when I talk about that, I mean them having to show up in two different ways, right? That the version of themselves that shows up to their colleagues, the version of themselves that shows up with their friends or even with their partner is completely different to the version of them that shows up to the temple on a Sunday or the one that shows up to the family function on a Saturday. And the sheer overwhelm and fatigue that sits with somebody having to navigate these spaces constantly on a daily basis of changing themselves.
Exhausting.
Yeah. That overwhelm, the exhaustion and the fatigue that's associated with that. I think that's one of the things that's a lot of the time not acknowledged. And for me, it's about creating that space around how exhausting that is and validating what that experience is like for them. I would say the other thing particularly is the grief of the things that their identity means that they may lose out on because of their culture, right? And that may be, we know how we've spoken about how big weddings are, right?
That's right.
And how there's so much pressure for families as well. That's such a proud moment for parents, right? But are they going to be able to partake in their religious events because of the way that they identify?
Yes.
The dream that their parents had for them. So the grief for themselves, but the grief for their parents. But that means there's also a lot of guilt, right? Because we know in our culture that we feel very responsible for our parents' emotions. It's part of that enmeshment again, that the way that our parents are, we need to be there to make sure that they're happy constantly. There was a lot of pressure on us for that. So with our queer community, there's a lot of guilt around not being who their parents wanted them to be, and not giving them that wedding, that partner, sometimes children, if that looks different for them. So that grief sits with both, the client and with the family and with the parents. And so I think these are, the particular things that may look a little bit different in terms of the therapy space when working with these clients and the issues that are showing up.
And with that, we are seeing though, a lot of them, if I may use the term, are coming out now. And basically there's a lot more information in the limelight, out on social media, in the community in general, what do you think has been the shift that has allowed them to really be more authentically themselves?
It's a good question. I think there's the social media and it's also the generation. I think the generation of individuals that are coming out now are not feeling as much fear. You know, we're more, I don't like to use this term, but we're a little bit more like awoken and a little bit more like consciously aware. We're the change makers,
Yes.
you know, like even us having this conversation right now, you know, that there's almost this internal drive to do things a little bit differently, but also create a more positive experience as well, you know, and it's almost like we're done putting up with the bullshit. You know, it's hard. It's hard to constantly keep up this facade. And so I think it's part of that fatigue as well, where it's like, oh, I don't want to do it anymore. So I'm going to step out, be who I am and be okay with it.
100%. And indeed, the change maker term really resonated with me, isn't it? We are all trailblazers and change makers. I like that term. For someone who's going through a transformation, if you may want to call it, or a journey in that regard, Saijel, tell me what would be one advice you want to give them if they're feeling like they're entering breaking point.
Entering breaking point, it's all part of the process. We almost break before we make the breakthrough.
Indeed.
And I think one thing that I keep reminding people is it's a marathon, not a sprint. You are on this journey for the rest of your life. Well, the issues you confront now, yeah, there's moments where you think, great, I've healed that, you know, that mother wound, that father wound, that boundary wound. And before you know it, it'll pop up 20, 30 times later when you have your own kids, when you're older, when your parents go through health issues. It's essentially about learning to be kind to yourself, giving yourself a bit of grace, you know, because I think the thing about being on the journey is it also opens us up to be really hard on ourselves. And I think that's something that I notice a lot in my clients is it's like, okay, well, now that I've healed, I need to show up to my family in my healed version of me. And when we don't, we come back to that, I'm a terrible person. Why did I do that? I'm really angry at myself, right? And we begin to feel like we've lost all the work that we've done. And it's really, really hard. But I think the one thing that I keep reminding my clients, because this is, like you said, it's a thing that everybody experiences, that it feels like you're breaking before you're moving forward, is that you have to remember that you're human and there's only so much that you can do. And yeah, that inner child may come out when you're around your family, and it's never going to be straightforward. The journey keeps going and there's no end, you know.
That's right. Journey's always got ups and downs. That's really good advice. Thank you, Saijel. All right, let's not really ignore the men, isn't it? That's not fair in our conversation if we do. So South Asian men and mental health, there's always been a stigma around that. I did touch on this a little bit earlier where I said the boys in the family or men in the family are always brought up to, in the sense that they've had to be stoic always, not express their emotions, not really talk about the difficulties they're facing or anything like that, because they need to have that strong persona. How do you think they can get out of this? So if you've really been working with clients like that, what's some advice that you've given them? So men in general and also women in their life, how or what can they do to support men in this regard?
It's actually really beautiful to see the number of men who are showing up to the therapy room now. And every time they do, I have so much admiration for them, that they're choosing themselves in a world that has always told them that they need to be the protector, the provider, you know, that masculine presence for their family, you know. And there is so much weight that is put onto their shoulders as the man, right? And we know in our culture it's, you're going to grow up, you're going to get a job and you're going to take care of your parents, you know. That's the transition of things.
Yes.
There's a lot of pressure in that, you know. And we've talked a little bit around the emotional side of things, right? And I think I said a little bit earlier that it's not that the emotions weren't there, it's that wasn't the permission to be felt, right? I think if a young boy showed emotion, there would be a consequence or a punishment for that, right? Because that's not how you're going to become the man that's going to protect and provide and take care of the family. And I think there's also, like we talked about, that generation of women now. I think, I have a lot of couples coming up to therapy as well, and they're like, I need him to be more open. I need him to be more emotional. He's not meeting my needs, And so as our women, we're also really struggling to find that balance as well. And I think the particular thing I found for my couples is allowing your partner, your husband, to step into that role of being emotional, okay? Because I think, and this is a little bit tricky, and I'll explain it, but I think what happens is when they're not meeting those needs, the emotional needs, it's quite often comes across as that criticism, you're not good enough, right? And that's quite often what has created a lot of that emotional disconnect, where they've obviously tried to continue to meet the needs of their parents or their father or, elders, right? And now they're in a relationship and my partner's telling me I'm not good enough. I need to do more, be more emotional, right? So it triggers that aspect of them that I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not the husband and the father that I'm supposed to be, right? So what that does is it actually causes them to withdraw, right? And go back into that space where they feel very isolated and very alone. And so I think a lot of the work with my couples has been about validating their experience, and for women to take a little bit of that step back, not completely, because I always say that, the feminine in your life is going to be the one that pushes you, not because she doesn't want you to succeed or because she wants to put you down. It's because she sees your potential and she wants you to reach it, But sometimes I think, as you said, we want that quick fix and we're trying to get to that next place, but it's all about creating an environment for you both to grow together. And this is where I say it's really beautiful that, you as a wife, as you're acknowledging that he's got so much potential and you want him to connect with those feelings, because that is going to help him grow as a man. But I wonder if sometimes the way that you're going about it is actually pushing him further away into that protective space, right? So sometimes it's have an invitation for an open conversation, Try not to be coming at it so harshly with, I need you to be this way or you are this way, and be more curious, and come together with those positive admirations for one another, just the small things that he is doing to increase his self-esteem and allow him to feel acknowledged and loved in those moments.
That's really great advice. You mentioned, the women being in their feminine energy. A lot of the times, I think personally, I sort of feel when couples end up getting a little distant or have difficulties starting to communicate, the woman often is already in her masculine energy because she feels like she's dealing with 100 other things and has taken that responsibility in the family. What are some things that men can do to reverse this so they can live in harmony? What's your advice?
This is a really good question, because I think this is something that is causing such a rift in the relationships as well. Because like you said, the women are taking on so much of that role that they're getting burnt out and fatigued, but it's building that resentment towards their partner, And I think for men as well, they almost, it's what I said earlier in terms of they're almost waiting for that permission, right? So the woman has to step back for the man to order to step in, it has to be like dual working together. And I think the masculine is beautiful in the sense that like they're grounded, but where they're needing to, I guess, make these shifts to allow the woman to step back is taking on a little bit of that mental load, and connecting in with the part of them that maybe they wouldn't often take that initiative to do things, And another aspect I think is to connect with her emotionally is being able to validate her emotional experience as well. I think quite often, and maybe you can attest to this, that, you go to your husband with a problem and he's like, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? And you're like, you get your back up and you get frustrated about it, because in that moment you're not asking him to provide solutions. Give you a
solution.
Yeah. Indeed. You're like, I just want you to hear me that I'm scared right now, or that I'm anxious right now, or that I'm angry right now, So to allow you to step into that feminine space of being in your feelings and giving what you need to, your the man in your life, giving you that space and validating and saying, I can see what you're feeling right now, and I'm here for you, and just holding you in that moment allows you to soften into that feminine energy a little bit more.
Indeed. Well, there you go, guys. A piece of advice for you all. Stop being the solution-focused partner all the time and sometimes just listen to your women. That's what you need to be doing. So, Saijel, tell me, you've moved from being or working within the system to now doing something yourself. What triggered this move? Was there a gap in the market you saw, or particularly your passion for South Asian therapy in general or intergenerational trauma? What instigated you wanting to do something of your own?
So when I was working, I guess, for not-for-profit organizations, I was working predominantly in the family space. And I mean, I don't know which way it kind of happened, but I was obviously always really interested in the family system and the way that that impacts, particularly from my own experience, being able to trace back a lot of, I guess, my mental health and my overwhelm to being that of my ancestors. So going into the family space, it was so natural that I was gravitating towards this, ancestral, intergenerational perspective, particularly when we're working with collective cultures. But there's just so much, I guess, that red tape. There's so many structures, models, and ways of working when you're in that environment. And for me, it was like trying to break out and trying to create change for these collective cultures. Because a lot of this intergenerational stuff, while my focus is on South Asian, it's very broad across every, collective culture. And I just felt like I have such a niche topic, one that's not talked about, one that nobody knows much about. And I just felt this sense of responsibility to bring it out, to create something for myself and to create more awareness for the community and for people out there as well. It just felt like a natural transition at the time, because it was almost like I'd reached everything that I could get out of it. And I was like, I have so much more to give and I've got nowhere to give it, and I'm working in a Western space, and I'm doing like work where I'm trying to decolonize, right? And so there was a real friction. Yeah, there was a real friction. I mean, 100%, it was a lot of learning, and it was a really great way to, ground myself and also to understand that Western way of looking at things. But when I pulled myself out of it and started looking at things more collectively and even working with, collective cultures, there were so many clients that really resonated with me, and they were like, I've never experienced a therapist who's actually been able to understand and hear me and create change for me, And so when I was seeing, I guess, these results, working with these clients, I was like, I need to do more. I need to find myself in a space where I'm actually able to give everything that I have to give.
Amazing. That's just so amazing. So having been on this journey, Saijel, for any subject matter experts or say someone thinking about wanting to become a consultant, what are some things you'd want to share with them as positives and negatives of doing this?
Yes, every individual is different. What fulfills us is, is different. But the positives would be, I just get such a rush.
And that's the deepest root of it all, isn't it? You need to be passionate about what you want to do when you branch out.
Yes. Yeah. Just that, being able to create change and being able to help people. I think there's so much pain and there's so much suffering out there. And I think if I can on any day alleviate that just a little bit, the collective can begin to heal. If one person can experience their life with a little bit of positivity or have a little bit more grace for themselves, imagine what that's going to do for the generations that come after them as well.
Yes.
So for me, the positives would be, making a change, but not just for my clients, but also for the generations that come after them. It's hard work though. And most days I've got nothing left to give to my own family. And that's tricky.
How do you cope with that?
It's tricky. It's, how do I cope? It's about finding balance, I think, prioritizing that self-care and moments when we do have them as well. Putting rituals in place as well, like non-negotiables, traditions, a lot of structures around, setting boundaries as well for myself, between clients and for my family. It's not easy. It's fulfilling, but I would say probably the biggest thing is learning to navigate the overwhelm can be tricky because you're carrying a lot of stuff, right? And for me, with this intergenerational work, sometimes it feels I'm carrying the ancestors and the grandparents and the client as well through their journey to healing, right? So there's a lot in that. But being able to find that balance and that grounding for myself has been very important, and having an understanding family as well, where they have grace for me when I'm not 100% perfect as well, is really important.
Indeed. A supportive partner, family makes all the difference. That's great advice. Thank you. Saijel, so if there was, say you had a magic wand and there was one thing you could redesign with how South Asian families worked or spoke to each other, what would that be?
Just one?
Just one. Pick one.
I think one of the biggest things is the silence, and the silence that's attached to shame, And I think something for me is just having more conversations, even with my grandmother. So I only have one grandmother who's still around, but it's been really cool to be curious. And it doesn't have to be any traumatic story. It's just beginning to ask about her childhood, ask about her life, And most of the time they are very open, like they do want to chat. But learning about her experience tells me so much about my own experience as well. And I think I'm really grateful that I grew up around my grandparents, which has given me this beautiful basket of knowledge, because my grandmothers did talk a lot about what their experiences were like. Yes, sometimes it was met with tears. Actually, most of the time it was, because it was so hard for them to come here with nothing, marry these men they didn't know, have these kids when they were children themselves, right? And hearing them in their pain and their grief as well of leaving behind a life that they knew. But just beginning to create conversations around just life, around our experience is one of the best things you can do to bring a lot of this stuff to the surface, which is healing in itself. Because I think the silence is what perpetuates the cycle of intergenerational trauma. The more we talk about it and reveal it, the more we can bring the healing into the space.
Absolutely. And that was very beautifully put, Saijel. That brings me to the end of all of my questions. What is one last message you'd like to give all of our listeners today?
One last message would be, if you're thinking about it, just do it. In terms of going to therapy, you don't have to. I think one of the things with South Asian people is there's so much minimizing of our experiences. And I say therapy is not just about dealing with some massive trauma. It's actually just giving yourself the opportunity to talk about your life, having somebody there listening with an open heart and an open mind and validating your experience. And even if it's just 1 or 2 sessions, can actually have such a profound impact on the way that you're showing up in your life. And it's about giving yourself that opportunity, saying, I love myself and I'm going to show up in therapy and talk about it because I'm important and because I want change and I deserve change as well. So if you're thinking about it, just do it.
Just do it. And if our listeners want to find you or contact you, how can they do this?
So I have a website, unlearnwithsaijel.com. I'm on Instagram. Ancestral Unlearning is the tag.
Handle.
Yeah. So that's how they can find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Saijel. It's indeed been a very insightful session, and I feel we really need to talk about this topic a lot more. And that's a wrap for the S&S Diaries, guys. See you on the next one.